On June 14, 2025, at 9:23 local time, the USS Princeton, a Ticonderoga-class American guided missile cruiser, was conducting routine patrols in the South China Sea, ensuring the freedom of navigation in international waters. It was just another regular morning task, much like many previous operations. However, this time, everything changed. The radar on the Princeton picked up a target, a Chinese destroyer of the Type 052D class. What followed, an airborne scramble of dozens of fighter jets and the surfacing of a nuclear-powered submarine, almost led to the outbreak of World War III. Let's go into more detail. The South China Sea has long been a battleground for two of the world's most powerful nations, the United States and China. This region is crucial not only because of the strategic shipping lanes that handle $3.4 trillion annually, but also due to its rich natural resources like oil and gas. The conflict of interest in this area has become inevitable. For China, the South China Sea is more than just a trade zone. It's part of a broader strategy to expand its influence both within Asia and beyond. China aims to gain complete control over the sea, disregarding international agreements and creating artificial islands and military bases, actions that have long sparked diplomatic conflicts. Each year, Beijing strengthens its position in the region, attempting to reclaim territories that it believes belong exclusively to China. In this context, every move made by the United States, every maneuver of American forces, is seen as a challenge and a test. For the U.S., the importance of the South China Sea is also significant. Losing control over this region would weaken America's position and disrupt the global balance. If China were to gain dominance here, the domino effect would expand Chinese influence to other regions of the world, from Taiwan to Southeast Asia. This incident became yet another example of the confrontation between the U.S. and China, where one nation's ambitions clashed with the unwavering resolve of the other. It's another piece in the complex puzzle that could either collapse, plunging the world into the hell of World War III, or become the foundation for cooperation and the freedom of navigation. The Chinese Type 052D destroyer was just 125 miles, 200 kilometers, away from the American ship, the USS Princeton. Suddenly, it accelerated from 18 to 30 knots in 90 seconds. This maneuver could not have been accidental. It was aimed at intercepting the American ship. The crew on the Princeton bridge understood. The threat was real. Fully aware that its actions were being tracked, the Chinese destroyer continued its approach. The rapid acceleration was part of an order that came from Beijing. Intercept the Americans and force them to retreat. In other words, to humiliate them. Or as it's said in the East, to lose face. The Chinese knew well that the USS Princeton was not alone. Behind it was the full might of the U.S. carrier strike group, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most powerful warship in history, which had earned the unofficial title of supercarrier because of its capabilities. Forcing such a formidable force to retreat would indeed be a major humiliation for America. The Princeton's detection system immediately processed the data. 3 minutes after the Chinese ship's acceleration, the threat analysis was complete. The Type 052D destroyer was confirmed as a potential threat. In 10 minutes, the American ship would be within its strike range. The Americans were ready to respond. 8 Harpoon missiles, capable of carrying 500-pound, 225-kilogram warheads at speeds of 0.8 Mach to distances of up to 75 miles, 125 kilometers. But the Princeton's command, remaining calm, decided not to rush. The captain issued the order to observe and wait for the next move from the Chinese. The decision not to immediately respond to aggression was a crucial strategic move. Maintaining control, unpredictability, and restraint. That's what sets the U.S. apart in such situations. Despite China's proximity, only 180 miles, 290 kilometers away, the crew of the Princeton remained confident in their strength. They had a state-of-the-art missile cruiser with one of the world's most powerful air defense and anti-missile systems, Aegis. Behind them was the supercarrier USS Gerald R. Ford, with dozens of reliable F/A-18EF Super Hornet fighter jets. And finally, behind them was the full might of America, the full power of their homeland, even though it was nearly 7,000 miles, 11,000 kilometers away. Meanwhile, the Chinese ship, maintaining a speed of 30 knots, continued to close the distance. Then a new move from the Chinese appeared on the horizon. An E-2D Hawkeye early warning and control aircraft flying at an altitude of 25,000 feet, 7,600 meters, relayed a message. J-15 fighters were taking off from the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong. Almost immediately, the sonar system on the Princeton picked up the signature of a Chinese Type 039 submarine. This was a 2,000-ton diesel-electric submarine with a crew of up to 45 people. It was equipped with 8 vertical launch systems for YJ-83 anti-ship missiles, the Chinese version of the Russian Granite, and 533mm Yu-4 torpedoes. The submarine was old, dating back to the late 1980s, making it loud and slow, only capable of 18 knots underwater. For comparison, an American Virginia-class submarine can reach speeds of up to 25 knots underwater, roughly 28.5 miles per hour, 46 kilometers an hour. The Chinese submarine had as much chance of sneaking up on American ships as a freight train would have of passing through Penn Station in New York City during rush hour without being noticed. Beijing was clearly aiming for escalation and intimidation with this maneuver, but the U.S. had its response ready. At 0937, additional FA-18E Super Hornets and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft were launched from the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. Soon, one Super Hornet and the EA-18G Growler took to the skies. The Growler immediately activated its powerful equipment, jamming the Chinese radars and creating false targets to confuse Chinese pilots. At 0947, the Chinese destroyer had closed to a critical distance from the aircraft carrier and began tracking it with a phased radar. Such an operation typically precedes a missile launch. However, the American Carrier Strike Group Command maintained their composure. The Harpoon missiles lay dormant in their launchers. The Princeton continued to actively track every move of the Chinese ship, preparing for an immediate response. One of the Chinese fighters closed in dangerously close to the FA-18, but the American pilot did not react outwardly to the threat, continuing with his flight mission. There was no hint of nervousness or haste in his actions. The tension in the ship's control rooms seemed on the verge of materializing into some terrifying monster. And in this atmosphere, the Chinese submarine unexpectedly raised its air snorkel, causing the Princeton's acoustic sensors to almost explode from the loud noise it emitted. It was like a sudden, loud shout in the middle of silence, a tactic to throw the enemy off balance and force them into impulsive action. A snorkel is a system used by submarines to intake air for diesel generators and engines when the submarine is at a shallow depth but cannot fully surface. When using a snorkel, the submarine creates a characteristic noise because air is drawn in through the pipe and water vortices and turbulence are created. By raising the snorkel, the Chinese deliberately compromised their stealth, creating acoustic noise that allowed the Princeton to track the submarine with accuracy to within a meter. This move was a provocation intended to rattle the Americans, to make them make a mistake or act prematurely. But instead, the Chinese revealed their vulnerability. At 0951, the Chinese submarine began moving toward the American forces. However, if combat had broken out, it would have been destroyed in 12 seconds, exactly how long it would take for SM-6 missiles from the USS Princeton to reach it and turn it into scrap metal at the bottom of the sea, harmless even to crabs. In response to this maneuver, the electromagnetic catapults aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford began launching Super Hornets one by one into the sky. First one, then the second, third, fifth, 10th. Powerful electromagnetic pulses from the catapult's capacitors, without any sign of fatigue, sent 30,000 pounds of metal and electronics into the sky over and over again. 20th, 25th, 30th Rhino soaring into the heavens, and the catapults continued to work. 40th, 45th within minutes. 48 FA-18E Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers were charging towards several Chinese J-15s, ready to obliterate anything in their path. To ensure the Chinese had no doubts about the determination of the American war machine, a Virginia-class submarine, previously undetectable to the Chinese ships, unexpectedly surfaced just 6 miles, 11 kilometers from the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong, displaying its full, formidable presence. In effect, the Chinese were shown how easily they could be shot at point-blank range. 4 Mk-48 torpedoes, each with 650 pounds, 250 kilograms of explosives, launched simultaneously from the Virginia, would send any Chinese ship, including the carrier, to the bottom. And there would be no way to evade the strike. The torpedoes were too close, and they were equipped with an acoustic homing system, allowing them to track the target and adjust their trajectory until impact. It was a resounding slap in the face. The Chinese Armada had been in the South China Sea for 8 days, and all this time the Virginia had been nearby, remaining unnoticed. As a result, hoping to scare the Americans, the Chinese themselves got scared and began to retreat hastily. At 1623, a radio command was issued, claiming the exercises were over and the Chinese ships began to move away from the American carrier group. Beijing wanted to demonstrate that it was the master of the South China Sea. In the end, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group convincingly showed the world that the South China Sea is not their personal pool. It's essentially the 6th Great Lake of the United States. Just salted. What do you think? Does America have 5 or 6 Great Lakes? Write your thoughts in the comments. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate a like and a subscription to our channel. See you next time.